Hey guys, my name is Chelsea Rivera. This is my CAP 1 for Kinesiology 516 ATP pathways. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is what is ATP. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. It contains one adenine molecule, one ribosome molecule, and three phosphate bonds. So ATP is pretty much the currency for energy. It's limited, so it's constantly having to be made throughout your body for you to be able to get the energy to not only just work out, but to just do simple things as turning your head, breathing, blinking, things like that. What does ATP do? So it's constantly being formed and broken down, as I mentioned before, because it is limited. It participates in the biological reactions and is central to the health and growth of all life. So without this, cells couldn't transfer energy from one location to another. So it's pretty vital in our body. So there are two important factors that help with the creation of ATP, glucose and fat. So I'll go over the pathways of those. In glucose, there is glycolysis, citric acid or the Krebs cycle, and then the electron transport chain. As far as fat, we have our B oxidation, the citric acid or the Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, or in other words, oxidative phosphorylation, and then as well as activation of fatty acids. The first thing I'm going to go over is glucose. So glucose is 6 carbons. We get glucose by eating proteins, carbs, and fats that are in our diet. So the first step is going to be the one molecule of glucose is going to go through something called glycolysis. And in order to do this, we would need to take 2 ATP. So the glucose, which goes through glycolysis, becomes 2 pyruvates. And all of this happens in the cytoplasm. So to get to the pyruvate, we go into our 2-acetyl CoAs. And again, this starts getting into more of the mitochondrion of our body. And from the 2-acetyl CoAs, we get 2 CO2s here, and then we get into the citric acid cycle. So in the citric acid cycle, we also get 2 ATP here, and then 4 CO2s. So as you can see here, we're getting 2 NADHs here, 2 NADHs here, and then 6 NADHs, and then 2 FADH2s. These all go through our electron transport chain. So when it goes through here, we're getting 4 to 6 ATP, 6 ATP, 16 ATP, and then 4 ATP. So we also have to get oxygen, and that turns into the water as well, so H2O. And through all of this, as you can see here at the bottom, we start off with the 4 ATP from the glycolysis and citric acid. And then in the electron transport, we're getting the 36 to 38. So our subtotal, because we have to minus the 2 we started with here, ends up being around 32 or 34 ATP. And so, like I said, this glycolysis will go in our cytoplasm, and then everything else, like the citric acid and electronic transport, happens in the mitochondria. Fat. So fat is going to be in our B oxidation, the citric acid cycle, the electron transport chain, and fatty acids. So in the B oxidation, there'll be 7 rounds. So you start off with 1 NADH, 1 FADH2, and 1 acetyl CoA. So once you get through 7 rounds of that, you end up with 7 NADH, 7 NADH2, and 8 acetyl CoAs. So you can see here the palmitic acid where it shows the B oxidation, 7 turns. So you start here. So then we move down to the 8 acetyl CoAs. So then we move to the citric acid down at the bottom where we end up with 24 NADHs, 8 FADH2s, and 8 ATP. So that shows here at the bottom as well. So the next area is going to be the electron transport chain. So we get 31 times 3 NADH, which gives us 93 ATP. And then we get 15 times 2 FADH2, which gives us the 30 ATP. So if we total all that, it's 131 ATP. But we did have to give 2 ATPs over in the B oxidation area, so if we subtract that, we should get a grand total of 129 ATP, which is crazy. So comparing that to our glucose, where our glucose, like I said before, was only getting the 34, we can see that the fat is going to give us more ATP. So how the pathways interact across exercise intensity and duration. So the two pathways work in similar motions. They both go through glycolysis, they both go through the citric acid, and they both go through the electric transport chain. So depending on the workout, you'd be using glucose, and depending on the workout, you'd be using fat. The only downside is that the fat, which I'll mention later on, it works slower, so you only use, that's the reason why you just use for moderate exercise. It takes longer to burn that. The primary factors that limit ATP production. So a lot of times if you are feeling fatigued or tired and you're wondering why, and it's more than likely it's because if you didn't eat, you're not giving yourself those proteins, the carbs, and the fats to be able to produce the glucose. Another key factor is making sure you're properly hydrated. Having that water definitely will limit the ATP production because you're not giving your body what it needs. A way to give this in the real world would be that without these processes, the body won't be able to function. You won't be producing the energy you need, and when you are whether working out or in a sport, you'll become more fatigued, weak, and you won't perform as well as you would if you were producing ATP on a regular. It is very important, like I mentioned, because it gives off that energy to be able to handle all those exercises, and not only that, everyday life, whether you're just walking around, cleaning, cooking, it definitely is a factor that you definitely would be important to have. What's this mean for our ability to sustain movement and exercise? So what's good about ATP is that it stores any excess energy. So even if on certain days you're not doing as much as you would on a normal day, your body's storing all that excess energy to get you through the day. Now, it's not going with that saying that you should just do nothing all day because you worked out all day yesterday. You're still needing to produce ATP to be able to do daily things. Both glucose and fat pathways will help with energy at different levels. So again, depending on the exercise, you'd always still need to use both, which gets us into why we can't just rely on the system that produces the most, which fat, as we saw in our diagrams, produces the most ATP. But because it breaks down so slow, we won't be able to rely on that every day. By getting energy from glucose, it'll give us the ability to use both and give us the energy we need to do our daily things. So that is my presentation on the ATP pathways, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.